a little bit, get a little bit tighter here so we don't block the whole traffic pattern. Some real just basic preliminary information about Mount Vernon and the property today. Of course, this is George Washington's home, Mount Vernon. He lived here he owned the property from 1754 until his death in 1799. He inherited the property from his older half-brother who died. It was first patented by their father, or actually the first house was built here by their father, probably in the 1730s, although that's really sort of undetermined. There's a lot of things we don't know about the early period here. Starting in the 1750s, it becomes pretty well documented. The plantation at its largest extent was about 8,000 acres, which makes it not the largest plantation in Virginia by any means, but certainly a significant plantation. Washington was a substantial landholder. He owned over 70,000 acres of land throughout Virginia and also west. Washington, of course, was a huge booster of the West and a proponent of Western expansion. And he tended to put his money where his mouth was in most things, and so not only did he promote it, but he also acquired land out there to support that as well. 8,000 acres, we now own 500 acres. Now, of greatest significance to our discussion today is the fact that the slave community here, which in 1799, the year of George Washington's death, numbered almost 320 individuals. And again, not the largest slaveholder in Virginia, but certainly, the top 1%. Those 320 individuals lived throughout the plantation. About 90 of them, by 1799, were living in this area. And they were primarily slaves who worked to support the Washington household as house servants, maids, cooks, etc. And then, because it was a large plantation, and like many plantations in Virginia, was involved in a lot of other activities other than just growing crops. So there were spinners and weavers here. There was a major fishery here. We had carpenters and coopers and a whole variety of craftspeople to support the entire plantation. Blacksmiths, all of those kinds of things. The 90 slaves who lived here were primarily folks who were doing that kind of work. Okay? So this was kind of the hub of the plantation, with about 90 slaves working here. So that means that the field hands rather, were living not here, they were living in outlying areas. And there were 4 of them. Mount Vernon was divided into what he called farms, 5 farms. This was called the Mansion House Farm. And as I said, really what was happening here, of course, was the Washington family was here, and then they sort of had all those crafts and things that supported the entire plantation. At the outlying farms, that's where the field hands worked. And there were 4 of them: Muddy Hole, Union Farm, Dogue Run Farm, and River Farm. And they're sort of spread out in this area. Now, significantly, we don't own any of those farms. So as we go along today, we'll talk about the information that we have at the plantation here that has allowed us to develop our interpretive program on slave life. Archaeology has been a big part of that. We'll talk about the archaeological excavations that have been carried out here that have been very helpful. Unfortunately, because we don't own those outlying areas, and because as you were driving through, you saw what they are now. They've been developed. And so at this point, we've not been able to find conclusively any of the sites of the outlying slave quarters. So that's an inherently limiting situation for us, because we can't therefore compare what's going on here at the Mansion House Farm with what's going on at the outlying farm. So we'll talk more about that as we go through. So 2/3 of the slaves then were actually living in these outlying farms. There were slave quarters that were erected there, small groupings of houses, and they were under the supervision of an overseer. And Washington had both hired white overseers and African-American overseers who were slaves here. So it's a little bit unusual in this area for him to have done that so much as he did, but that was the case. So that's part of the issue here, is that we've got what's going on here at the Mansion House Farm then, which we'll be talking about mostly today, but we always need to keep in the back of our minds that there's this other situation going on, and that these slaves are working in a very different situation. They're not close to the Washington family. They're performing very different tasks, and we can expect from both the documentary and archaeological evidence that their daily lives, how they did things, would be significantly different than what was going on here at the mansion. Okay? Any questions about that? And then just the tippy top thing, that Mount Vernon is a privately owned site. We're not part of the Smithsonian or the National Park Service, which many people assume. The Ladies Association, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, still owns and operates Mount Vernon under charter from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they've owned it and operated it since 1858. So we occupy a couple of very important places in American history. We're one of the very first historic preservation organizations in the country, and we're also, interestingly, one of the very first organizations of any kind that was completely run by women. And our board of directors is still all women. So it's an interesting situation. We can talk more about that as time goes on as well. Okay, any questions?
Are all the quarters within a distance here that a slave could get back to the mansion house within a day or half a day?
Yes, yeah. It's 8,000 acres, and there definitely was. I mean, it would be the kind of thing where in one day it would be difficult to get back, unless you had all day to do it. The farthest distance is probably 3.5 miles from here. So, that's not that difficult to walk as long as you've got some time to get it accomplished. And Washington typically rode around to just about all of his outlying farms on a given day. And he would go out and talk to the overseers and see what was going on.
Are they all along the river, or are they in?
No, they're inland. River Farm was up here. Actually, when you came down from Alexandria, you passed through River Farm. And the quarters were fairly close to the river there. And the other ones are, well, Union Farm way, it's not real close to the water, but it's not too far. And then the other two are inland. Muddy Hole and Doe Run are farther on the inland. Okay? All right, let's walk down this way. So what we're going to start seeing then are the manifestations of the activities here at the Mansion House Farm. We'll be going down to start off with to look at a reconstructed slave quarters. I'll talk a little bit about it here because we've got more space, but we'll go down to it in just a second. That was the main slave quarter at the Mansion House Farm, and it was built in the 1790s. What we're going to see when we go down there is a reconstructed building that was completed in 1951. The original burned in a fire in 1835. And so it was reconstructed in 1951 on the foundations of the original building. And there were all sorts of issues about how to interpret that space that we'll talk about when we get down there. Okay? Can you hold that a little?